Hello and welcome to the Path to Security as Code, one company's journey. So companies everywhere are moving to the public cloud, but they often struggle to ensure appropriate security, regulatory compliance, and protection of themselves and their customers from breach or disruption. So a new security approach is needed, one that automates security and compliance across the entire cloud application lifecycle, prevents breaches before they can happen, and immediately identifies drift and attack in runtime environments. Today, we're going to walk through the story of one large publicly traded financial services firm's security as code journey towards proactively addressing risk within their cloud delivery pipeline. And what we hope that you'll take away from this are best practices for approaching security risk and compliance in the hybrid multi-cloud world we live in through the shift towards continuous control automation and preventative control posture with the adoption of a security as code program and injection of security policy into all aspects of your application and data lifecycle. But just to start, let me quickly do some introductions. So I'm Don Duet. I'm the chairman and co-founder of Concourse Labs. And prior to helping start Concourse Labs, I was at Goldman Sachs for almost a 30-year career, helping that firm both with its technology, innovation strategies, and delivery onto public cloud. I'm also joined by Chris Clark. Chris, you want to introduce yourself very quickly?
Sure, thanks, Don. I'm Chris Clark. I'm VP of Product here at Concourse Labs. Prior to coming over here, I ran the infrastructure for Accenture Security globally. And then before that, worked at Palo Alto Networks and a number of other startups building both security and network security tools, network and product tools. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So let's dive into our case study in which we're going to focus on, first and foremost, the cloud security and compliance challenges that our client was facing as they began their transformation plan to use public cloud as a strategy. Second, to understand why security as code was ultimately the solution to many of their challenges. Third, what was essential to them in securely migrating to public cloud, what actually mattered. And then we're going to have Chris is going to lead us through how they actually solve for many of these requirements and needs using the Concourse Labs platform. But let's start first with a quick overview of our client's profile, their business and technology attributes. So, our client reached out to us in early 2019. They were a large publicly traded financial services firm that was embarking on an aggressive infrastructure transformation program. This program was the catalyst for its migration to public cloud and the use of public cloud services. And as part of this program, they sought to establish a modern delivery program for building dynamic, agile infrastructure and applications, which for them required a substantial amount of re-architecture of monolithic applications and moving towards cloud-native microservices and modern application delivery. The customer itself had some interesting aspects, which I would not be surprised don't resonate with many of you on this call today. Number one, they were a highly regulated business, and they had tremendous amount of focus on security. It is essential for them to ensure they were operating first class from a security perspective. Second, as a large company, they had a lot of internal organization and governance complexity with over 5 different business units that were moving towards this strategy of embracing public cloud. Third, they had a large amount of developers and development teams. So the number of developers to their security professionals was a factor, multiplying factor for them, and wasn't going to change as they were building, increasingly more of their applications themselves using in-house development practices. And from a strategy perspective, they had a number of objectives which were very important. Number one, and probably most importantly, they viewed this migration, this transformation as necessary to transform their business processes to ensure they were going to be innovative over time and competitive over time in their own industry. So they saw the cloud not purely as a destination, but as a path towards ensuring they could be driving digital innovation more actively and more aggressively as a firm, which was deemed necessary for their competitive positioning. And then secondly, because of that, they had sponsored a long-term shift to modern software practices. So they knew that they really wanted to do things well and do it right and focusing comprehensively. But they also had a tremendous amount of existing legacy applications and processes. So the burden was high to make this migration and move. So like many companies approaching the cloud for the first time, our client started by making a number of strategic investments as part of their strategy. First and foremost, they took the perspective that they needed to migrate towards infrastructure as code as the practice for managing and procurement of cloud services. Secondly, they recognized that the ability to operate and run consistently the diverse set of applications that they had meant that they needed to begin the journey into pipeline-based DevOps models for CI/CD, for continuous integration and deployment. And then third, they took the perspective that really migrating their development processes to become agile and follow agile principles was going to be necessary to enable development teams to operate more independently, to get more scale, to innovate faster for their application creations. So a lot of focus, therefore, on how they would build and drive solutions for using the cloud. But unfortunately, like many other institutions that we see today, while the focus on transformation and automation on the application development and delivery model receives significant attention and investment, the focus on security, risk and control was not there yet. And historical practices around application security, risk management were largely migrated to the cloud as they were operating in their on-premise environment. As a result of this, as cloud adoption began to accelerate, our client quickly realized that they had three principal issues. Number one, the assurance of application security, while essential and fundamental to their risk framework, could not keep up in its manual current form, due both to the diversity of cloud services as they started to consume a range of services in the public cloud, as well as the pace of change as the development teams were scaling up. Expertise in cloud security in the security teams also meant that the ability to just grow out of this by hiring more people was not a very realistic alternative. The second critical issue that our client realized was that while security at our client had decades of experience defining policy for the design of best practices for applications and data, the cloud quickly exposed how much these policies had relied on the assumption of on-premise, lockdown, physical data centers, as well as the strict separation of duties in the management of infrastructure, which were rapidly being decentralized to their development teams. It was quickly recognized that while policy and risk objectives were often consistent across the on-premise environment and the public cloud, that the policy implementations for public cloud in particular, required a complete rethink and re-implementation. And then the third principal issue that our client quickly ran into was that, like many institutions embracing the public cloud, our client relied heavily on runtime-based tools to observe cloud state and activity in order to determine if there were compliance and security issues. As the use of cloud grew, so did the mean time to recognition and, importantly, the mean time to resolution of risks. The client quickly recognized this was not a scalable risk posture or an acceptable risk posture, and that a preventative and detective approach would be necessary in order to meet their standards for risk and mitigation, detection and mitigation. So as the cloud transformation continued to grow, these three issues became increasingly painful and challenging for our client, ultimately driving the recognition that a new path for cloud security would be required in order to meet their overall business innovation needs. A new investment, therefore, was required for security, risk, and control to operate at the cloud speed and pace and scale that the development teams were being moved towards. And at the center of this new investment was the core recognition that automation of security processes would be essential to enable the growth and pace of change while maintaining and ideally exceeding the quality of its security and risk practices. Embracing security as code was a necessary first step to enabling the automation of security practices. With the formalization of control, design, and requirements into codified policies, a number of doors could be opened. First, the ability to integrate and embed security policy at all stages of the application lifecycle, from software change management to continuous integration and delivery, to the actual observation of what actually was happening in the runtime environments. This ability enabled them to be very diverse in how they could apply controls, where they could apply them to, and ultimately enable preventative and detective risk posture. Second, the automation of critical control processes in a diverse and complex contextual environment by supporting the ability to move many of the different complex rules that surround a policy implementation into software enabled scale so that they can operate reviews for application change, as an example, in an automated form and move from a human sign-off and manual sign-off process into one that could be done digitally. And then third, the ability to operationalize and develop a firm-wide security as code program to allow for agile principles and practices to be brought not only into the development teams and communities, but into the security and compliance communities, recognizing that the pace of change for controls needed to operate in that same basis, that it could be constantly adding, enhancing, and improving in an agile methodology. So all of this, of course, implied a significant change in their investment profile, and was at the end of the day, was ultimately a decision, though, that was made from a risk perspective, that it was the only answer that was strategic, that would enable their next generation of technology investments. Central to their reasoning were the fact that, number one, protecting cloud assets is just quite different than protecting on-premise applications and network assets. And cloud services were literally one step away from compromise or exposure. No matter how you configure a NAS device running in your data center, there is no command that you can give or setting to toggle to make it accessible to the public internet. There are just too many layers between that device and the outside world. Living, however, in the public world of infrastructure with the use of software-defined tools like infrastructure as code, all it would take is one S3 bucket misconfiguration in Amazon, and your sensitive data is wide open for anyone to access. And ultimately, the third aspect that contributed to their risk decision was that the detective response just would never scale. They were going to continue to manage more developers, growing more product, delivering at a faster pace, and concurrently trying to manage hundreds, perhaps going to thousands of tickets related to cloud misconfiguration or compliance issues that were recognized in the live runtime environment would leave far too much exposure for their risk tolerance and security posture. So the firm made a decision that they needed to invest in security as code in order to achieve three critical changes to their cloud investment and transformation program. The first investment they needed was to automate the security and compliance reviews. Doubling or tripling the size of their security team, as we mentioned earlier, was just not an option. And it would not solve the long-term challenge in scaling issues regardless. Second, they needed a set of controls that would ensure their specific objectives were being met. As the firm's VP of technology put it, the boundaries and concerns of industry standards don't necessarily line up with our concerns, since they were not developed with our business in mind. So the complexity of their business meant that they needed to have controls that were built and designed for them. Therefore, they needed to have policy implementations that met the needs of the firm and the client, not just the needs of the industry. And third, given the immediate risk posed by misconfigured cloud services, they knew they had to embrace a preventative control posture and move towards a world where they could validate the security and compliance of their infrastructure as code before it was deployed. And lastly, but most importantly for us, they recognized that they needed a path and a partner to help them get there to meet these three principles, which could support the diversity, scale, and regulatory complexity of their business. So let me hand it over to Chris to talk about how Concourse was able to help this client to achieve those objectives and those three compliance security essential principles. Chris, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, more than happy to do so. So this is where Concourse Labs comes in. Tony, if you could slide the next slide, would be perfect. Thank you. Our security as code platform empowers companies for the first time ever to achieve the same level of automation for governing security and compliance of public cloud usage that they have for the use of infrastructure as code itself. Using our SaaS solution, the firm transformed a completely manual process, one that took 2 weeks to complete a security review, to a fully automated process that takes only seconds, all without requiring them to find dozens of cloud experts who are increasingly hard to find, especially for niche security needs for the cloud. Next slide, Tony. As previously mentioned, the firm also needed to be able to write policies, to define controls that were complete and detailed enough to meet unique requirements for their business and how they specifically use the cloud. With Concourse, the firm's policies authors do not need to know tens of thousands of Azure, AWS, GCP resource types that are available at any given moment, nor the property or string values or options to ensure the objectives are met. They also don't have to know how to correctly write the policy logic. Concourse does the majority of this for them and guides them on their way. With Concourse, all available cloud resources are pre-verified against the cloud provider's APIs. Teams test the policy and if in the provider's native language to avoid policy errors that result in controls not being checked. In addition to that, Concourse has a set of policies that are curated by our own experts available for the customer to be able to use either in their native form or to customize for their environment to meet specific requirements to give them a head start along that pathway. Next slide, Tony. Now that the firm had a complete set of automatable controls that were developed specifically for their business, they needed to ensure that these controls were applied appropriately across their enterprise. One of the key elements of Concourse that's not offered anywhere else is our surfaces concept. We'll talk about that a little bit right now. As you automatically enforce policy, you want to avoid alert noise and risk created from blanket enforcement of the same policies across different geographies, application stages, business units, each with their own unique requirements. As an example, the firm was able to easily define and manage policies for different phases of an application's lifecycle. As you can notice, there's production and development present here, as well as different regions in a sandbox. After all, what's deemed acceptable in one sandbox is very different from what's allowed in production, while also ensuring that all applications, regardless of stage, meet a core set of global requirements, as you can see above at the very top. In that way, we can ensure simplistic things like encryption for everything is across the board implemented. However, specific rules, maybe network access or ports in and out, can be defined specifically based upon application stage of development or application type. Having a control hierarchy like this not only reduces the number of risks, but also drastically reduces how long you're exposed, since only certain people or certain applications might be exposed to something, as well as the notification remediation process is minimized because the amount of alert fatigue is also minimized, since the only time you're seeing an alert is when it's specific to the organization that it applies to. Next slide, please, Tony. Finally, this financial service firm realized the best way to stay out of the headlines and to avoid a cloud breach was to proactively prevent these misconfigured services from being deployed at all. Sensible. As the firm endeavors to shift left and begin to move some of this controls into their pipeline, they've started to implement these automated guardrails within tools like Jenkins and Travis CI. And after about 9 months, push further left into SCM tools, including Bitbucket and GitLab. Now, every time a developer merges code, that code is automatically validated for security and compliance by Concourse Labs. And after more than a year into their security as code journey, the firm has the peace of mind knowing that every developer across their 35 application teams is automatically applying the latest controls during every sprint, or if they've run into any guardrails, they understand why there is in fact an issue with the code that they're trying to push so that they can remediate it without having to go through the long loop of push to deployment and then having the security team spend cycles to inform them of the violation. This improves both the relations between security and development, as well as increases security team's visibility and developers and the development team visibility as well throughout the course of the SDLC and the application lifecycle. Next slide, please. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it back over to Tom.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate that walkthrough and the explanation. So, our mission at Concourse is to help enable and support the enterprise in successful migration, adoption, and long-term consumption of public cloud services. And as you've hopefully seen so far, we're passionate about security as code as the core to the transition and transformation of enterprise security and compliance into the era of modern application development and cloud computing. Similar to our client case study, we see many enterprises who are increasingly recognizing the strategic need to develop their own security as code program in order to allow themselves to manage this transition to shift from historical practices into a continuous automation control process for their business. Our platform at Concourse provides the core components out of the box as a SaaS provided solution, which can help your company get started on this journey and enable rapid value creation and immediate risk reduction through both our out-of-the-box security as code services, our role and responsibility and governance capabilities, and our next generation content itself for the cloud and designed for the for multi-cloud providers. Increasingly, our three principle approach to the formalization and delivery of a comprehensive security as code program is helping many enterprises, both large and small, accelerate this roadmap to move to this next generation of strategy and to really help improve and accelerate their overall business transformation into cloud and into their next generation of digital architecture. If you'd like to learn more about our three principle approach, we would recommend that you visit our website, where we have a number of webinars that really focus on different aspects of this model and this approach to developing a strong security as code program in a lot more detail. While you're here, or if you are here, please do stop by our booth at ONUG and say hello and meet some of the team as well. So that's pretty much the end of our client case study. And we think regardless of where you are in your cloud formation approach and model, we hope at least some of the following learnings resonated. Number one, moving from a detective only towards a prevent and detect for cloud security and compliance is foundational in establishing a strong risk and control model for public cloud. It's also something that's real and can be delivered very rapidly and very quickly. We'd love to show it to you. Number two, investing in the abilities to shift security and compliance into an agile, automated approach is also essential in enabling business transformation that we all desire, with the control and efficiency necessary to keep your business safe and protected. So helping it manage that process of moving towards where continuous management of risk, continuous improvement of risk and through implementation of policy as code is something we help our clients with. And it's essential in how you rethink your own approach we see over time for managing the complexity of multi-cloud and maintaining a very strong risk posture. And then lastly, getting on that journey and the path towards a security as code program should be considered an essential component of your digital transformation strategy and of course your investment. While this may sound daunting and seem very complex, there are partners like Concourse have the industry experience to help rapidly establish and accelerate your journey. So that's it. Let me hand it over to Tony and see if there's any questions from the audience. Thank you.